and I are feds who need to be called out.
Oh,
apparently, yeah. Okay, I'm just
hey,
letting you
well,
know.
I want my year-end bonus. I didn't get my
do
damn
too.
check.
I'm a Fed, baby, and I need to be called out. It means I'm doing a good job. Where's my damn money?
Yeah.
My wife tells me never read the comments, but every once in a while
I
I
thought
see
you
one of
all
my-
were like agents of the Kremlin. I've been an agent of the CPC. I have not received my money for that either. But all right,
So,
let's go back to
but what are, hell, I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to. I don't have anything that. Maybe this could be my crystal ball. I'll rub it. Oh, what's going to happen in the next year? I mean, this is always dangerous because I'm going to answer your question because it's a good question, and I'll give it the best shot I have. But it's January. What is today? The 4th? January 4th.
Yeah.
Today's the 5th. God, I'm already so messed up. Okay, the 5th. And you want me now to project out into a year where we have no idea we have a new president coming in on January 20th, and with that will come a lot of change, and it's hard to predict what it does, but I'll do my best. I think there's widespread agreement that this conflict as it currently stands is unsustainable for both Ukraine and its Western supporters, that the ability to continue the conflict as within the parameters that currently exist, Ukraine will rapidly run out of manpower. The 18-year-olds will be killed and they have nothing left. The West has run out of equipment to give Ukraine. The defense industry hasn't caught up with this in a meaningful fashion. And politically, the West is exhausted. Russia, while there are, of course, difficulties in sustaining this, the Russian economy is overheated because of an over investment into defense industry. Inflation is rising. But I think the last time I saw it, the inflation was at 9.1%. I remember when Vladimir Putin took over, inflation was 2,500%. So the idea that Russia is in a crisis now because of this is absurd. Russia is basically fighting the Western world in terms of the mobilization of industrial capacity, and that has an economic impact, especially when you're dealing with a situation where simultaneously to doing this great mobilization, you have economic sanctions that are constraining in nature. I think the Russians are doing fantastic given everything that they've had to overcome. And they're going to be able to sustain this. This is, Russia's not going to run out of, the economic wherewithal to wage this conflict. Manpower-wise, Russia, yes, Russia has suffered losses, nowhere near that which President Trump was briefed on, but losses nonetheless. But the Russians continue to have a sufficient pool of volunteers that not only replace battlefield losses, but allow Russia to build, operational reserves. And if push comes to shove, Russia has the ability to mobilize on short notice a million men of military age, and they have the ability to, they've had a couple years now to get the whole mobilization thing up. They've repaired all the defects that they were uncovered back in the fall of 2022. Russia can go that quick and put people in the field, armed, equipped, ready to go, and the West can't. So nothing's going to happen to change this correlation. Now, there are things that can happen to complicate it. So now we have to look at President Trump. What does President Trump want to achieve? In an ideal world, he would like to bring an end to the conflict in Ukraine and get credit for it. Remember, we're dealing with a man whose ego is quite big. He just doesn't want the war to end. He wants to get credit for it. That's not an impossible task. He also wants to disentangle the United States from the system in Europe that has created the Ukrainian trap, because Trump views what happened in Ukraine as a trap. And so what that means is he wants to disengage from NATO, whether it is a full-scale pull the plug or it's a drawing down of American commitment to NATO. The bottom line is he wants Europe to take responsibility for its own security. these competing ideas will work if you can get out of Ukraine without creating the condition where Russia is perceived to be a real threat, not this fake propaganda threat, but a real threat to Europe that warrants a European mobilization of capabilities. What you want is for the Ukraine conflict to end, for Russia to be viewed by the West as non-threatening in terms of making a move, on a physical move, and therefore within Europe, while Europe will take over responsibility for its security, it will be done in a way that Europe won't be compelled to financially destroy itself, because Europe cannot do the kind of mobilization I just spoke about Russia doing. They're incapable of doing that politically, economically, socially, the whole thing. But if you get in a situation where the war ends sloppily, Trump puts his credibility on the line only to be humiliated by the Russians, who aren't going to do that which his advisors want them to do. Trump takes it personally and begins to invest into building up Ukrainian capabilities, and Europe jumps in on that. Russia's still going to win, but now we have a whole complicated situation that instead of having the United States disengaging from Europe, we're now doubling down. And this is a real possibility, even though Trump says that's not what he wants to have happen. Winding this war down is not going to be easy. There's a lot of politics involved in it. So it really comes down to who Trump is going to listen to, or who's going to have the greatest influence on Donald Trump. There was an interesting post by a former deputy national security advisor in the Trump administration, who served for the entire 4 years of the first term. And he said that he's very concerned about the incoming national security team. He says because they'll have 50 to 60% holdovers from the Biden administration. And he said these people are poison. They will continue to implement the policies of the Biden administration, and they will undermine the policy objectives of Team Trump. And that instead of doing what should be done, which is to fire everybody and start over with a fresh team totally focused on implementing his policies, Trump is going to be poorly served by a team that's going to seek to undermine him, sabotage him, etc. And if that's the case, and Trump relies upon them, then this could become ugly. Because again, Russia's going to end the war the way Russia wants to end the war. Trump isn't going to come in. There's no such thing as the magic phone call, the magic summit, and all that. But if Trump were clever, there's things you can do. The Russians have, again, Ray McGovern, we all know Ray. I love Ray. Said, listen to the Russians. They'll tell you what you need to do. And the Russians have already said what you need to do. You need to come in and smile and say, we're finishing the strategic objectives of seeking the strategic defeat of Russia. That's no longer our policy. We're not out to defeat you. We don't want that. See, now the Russians are going, have a seat at the table. We're willing to talk to you now. What would you like to talk about? We'd like to talk about bringing an end to this conflict. And then the other thing, the Russians keep talking about the treaties that they put on the table back in December of 2021. Biden's pretend that those treaties don't exist. Oh no, those treaties exist, and they represent the foundation of Russia's diplomatic thinking on how this war is going to end. Because the war isn't just about Ukraine, it's about a European security framework. And Trump could easily come in, it's my personal belief, and tell the Russians, we're going to give you everything you want in Ukraine. Yeah, that's not a problem. But with Europe, we're not going back to 1997. That's not going to happen. We're going to maintain the structure the way it is, but we're going to work with you to re-engage on that. And I believe the Russians on that one won't draw a red line and say, all right, as long as we have open dialogue, as long as we can build something in writing, we can make movement. Now Trump comes out as a winner in his mind. This is a possibility, but he doesn't have, Andre hit it on the head. There is no Russian expert. I'm not claiming to be a Russian expert. I mean, I just say that I at least try to be a Russian expert. I've made the effort. We used to train Russian experts. Back in the Cold War, in Garmisch-Birchgarten, we had what they call today the Marshall Center for whatever the heck they call it. It used to be the United States Army Russian Institute. And all the foreign area officers would go there for 1 or 2 years, and they had a village, a Russian village, populated by Russians. They were all emigres, mainly either the older people were actually white Russians or the children were white Russians. But the one thing they all did, besides hate the Soviet Union, which they did with a passion, is they loved Russia. And so when you went through this course, you were taught to love Russia. You were basically put on the lap of a grandmother who told you about the wonderful land she came from, the culture, the thing, and you got this appreciation for Russia. And when you have that appreciation, again, you may be against the government, but you're programmed to approach and talk and interact with the Russians. That was the difference between the Cold War and today. In the Cold War, across the board, your mission was to close with and engage, not through combat, but engage the Soviet target. That means you have to sit there and talk with them. Language commonality. You have to have something interesting to say. Shared cultural perspectives. Things, and you have to be knowledgeable about the information you want to get from them. I remember one of the taskings I got while I was in the Soviet Union. This group of Afghan veterans came in. An Afghan veteran group came in and put on a demonstration in downtown Vodkinsk, or at the stadium, of what it was like to be ambushed by the Mujahideen. And so they put on a theatrical display. They did that and the whole thing. But afterwards, I got down there and started talking to these guys to find out, how the war was, what the Russian mindset was, and to write reports about this. People were fascinated in this. They wanted to know these things. They wanted to know the detail, the minutia. Today, Georgetown Foreign Service Institute trains Foreign Service officers for the United States Army. My daughter just graduated from that program. Her classmates were these people. They don't want to interact with the Russians at all. They are actually, their job now is to go through an academic advisor who shapes their brain through propaganda. They become propaganda tools. They're not there to learn from the Russians. They're there to already impose their will on people, not the Russians directly, because they're not even allowed to interact with them anymore, on people peripheral to the Russians. For instance, go to the Turkish attaché and get them to go against the Russians and all this totally screwed up way of doing business. But that's how we do it today. Trump is getting bad advice. And my fear is that unless he recognizes how bad this advice is, he's going to fall into a trap that creates the worst possible outcome, which is the United States doubling down on stupid, trying to extend this conflict, pouring more money in, more resources, and because Trump has an ego that is very difficult, get in a situation where Trump can't admit that there is defeat, so he will begin to escalate. And ATACMS missiles may be used. He already called them stupid, but he may say, well, we're going to do that because we have to put pressure on the Russia. You have, I think it's Foreign Policy Magazine just wrote a paper saying that we have to double down on stupid. We have to increase the pressure on the Russians. No, this war is going to end in Russia's favor, or it's going to end in a nuclear holocaust. The West will never win this war. And if we had real Russian experts, the kind that we used to train, they'd be able to tell Trump that. But we don't have these experts anymore. Trump's getting bad advice. And my concern is this war could either be wrapped up by summer. And when I say wrapped up, not just won by the Russians, but starting to get the diplomatic bow on it, or it's going to go into the fall and maybe into another year. The Russians are ready to fight this war up until 2028 or 2027, I think was the number I heard. So, I mean, would Russia like this war over today or this year? Yeah, they would. Is Russia going to fall down and cry and weep if it goes into another year? No. I think it was Larry that said, or Andre that said, Russia's just not going to throw the bodies away. Russia's fighting a very smart war, and they will make the adjustments necessary to continue to fight a smart war that kills all the Ukrainians, burns up all the Western equipment, and tries to minimize the loss to Russia while Russia continues to advance. I can't tell you when the Ukrainian army is going to collapse, but it's going to collapse, and it's going to collapse relatively soon, I believe. I think you're going to see, Pokrovsk is going to turn out to be a big battle. The Ukrainians are digging in, they're pouring in resources, but a lot of the resources they were supposed to pour into Pokrovsk are being killed in Kursk right now. But after Pokrovsk falls, and I think it's going to fall sooner rather than later, there's nothing to stop the Russians from going on and capturing the rest of the Donbass, and then moving into Zaporizhia and moving into Dnipropetrovsk. And when Kursk finally collapses, there won't be anything behind it. Sumi's going to fall. Kharkov's going to get surrounded. I mean, we are looking at the potential for a tremendous amount of lost territory on the part of the Ukrainian military by the summer. And that's as Putin said, the war will end based upon present realities. Well, the reality is going to change a whole lot between now and the summer. And it's in Trump's interest to get the Russians to start talking about the conditions to bring it into this conflict now, as opposed to in the summer. But he needs good advisors, and he doesn't have good advisors right now. Andrei's 100% correct. There is not a real Russian expert in government today because we don't train them anymore. The academic institutions that used to pump them out are propaganda institutions now. Harvard, Stanford, Yale, Georgetown. They don't produce Russian experts. They produce anti-Russian propagandists.